so glad you joined us, invited us back into your home or car or camping trailer or maybe sidewalk if you're enjoying the sunshine. We're just glad to be with you and connecting in this way, and just what a treasure it is, and so thankful for your time. Today we're going to dig into the Word. We're going to finish the book of Esther, and we're going to see how that leads us toward Christmas. And what a wonderful season Christmas is if we really get the goal of Christmas, the treasure of Christmas, the real prize, which is Jesus, the Prince of Peace. I want that peace for you. I want that load taken off your shoulders. I want you to enjoy not just life, but enjoy God. Be satisfied with Him. And so I'm hoping that today you hang with us, and we're going to sing a song and then go into the Word and then take communion together. And then we'll finish with a song and say goodbye for now. But my encouragement is to you is to reach out and connect with us. We are a family. We're the family of God. We want to invite you into the family as well. So go to our website, go to our Connect page. You can go to our outreach page and sign up to help with the tree lot. We're making all sorts of great connections with the community there. You can go to our give page and give to our mercy fund, our general fund. You can give to the Union Gospel Mission food that we're doing. You can bring food. Go to the care page, and you can help bring food so that we can give out to families during this time. There's lots of ways that God is at work in and through us as a church, and so I just encourage you to step in there. And you can always just email me, Aaron at issaquah.cc. I would love to get connected with you and know how we can walk with your family. We want to be a family for your family as we move into this closing scene of 2020. We're praying for good things for you. Let's worship Jesus together. Of year where holiday classics are coming on. And I'm noticing more and more that people are going back to do origin stories. We've been watching some animated films recently and going back to how did it all begin? Who was this Santa Claus figure? How did it all start? How did the conflict begin? How were the decisions made? How did the hero rise? What do we have to celebrate today, right? Just going back to the origin of it all. I'm getting a little bit tired of it. But in Esther, as we close the book here, we see it come full circle to the origin story, really, of the festival of Purim. Now, many of you don't celebrate that, but you'll see it's meant to be a celebration that lasts throughout time for the Jewish people. It's a topsy-turvy. In fact, it's sometimes called that. A topsy-turvy Mardi Gras Halloween kind of combo where the Jews celebrate their victory over their enemies. What's not to love about that, right? We see Mordecai's rise to prominence and his position to preserve the Jewish people. We even see Esther rise up as a warrior queen. She lives up to her Persian namesake. We think her name comes from Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, right? She wins the battle of getting the king's attention in this crazy survivor game of sexual pleasure. And then we see her now rise up as this warrior. And this warrior queen actually asks for an extra day of civil disturbance. Hey, if it please the king, can we kill them one more day just to make sure it's all over? So anyway, here's the book. I won't read the whole thing to you, but Esther chapter 9 and 10, we see that here it comes. The king's command is about to be carried out. On the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain mastery over them, the reverse occurred, right? And that's a theme throughout this entire book. The reverse occurred. You thought it was going to go this way, it went the other way. In fact, the whole book, the symmetry of this book, the arc of it, is all about reversals, right? So the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. And we look through this, and you could count the number of times that the word killed is used. And it's just violent, right? It's violent in a self-defense sort of way because there was an edict that had gone out from Haman, the bad guy. They keep calling him the Agagite, son of Hammedatha. But Haman the Agagite that wanted to destroy the Jewish people. Now we know Haman wanted to destroy them in part because he really hated Mordecai. And then when he found out he was a Jew, he's like, oh, well, that's game on, right? But we also see this vile, evil hatred in Haman that we want to call out. We want to say that's born of the enemy of God's people. That's satanic. That's demonic. There's something about that. We see that in the history of the 20th century. Right? We see evil happen, all these human evils. Yeah, human, but also real evil. Like real bad actors of the enemies of our soul, Satan, demonic powers driving people, and in many ways to kill the Jewish people again and again and again. But there's something really vile, and it's an animosity toward God and toward his purposes. And so in this, whether it makes you squeamish or not, in this passage, we start to see, oh, well, the origin story of Purim is it's time to battle back. It's time to go after him. And so they killed their enemies, and Mordecai rose in prominence and more powerful, and they struck all their enemies, verse 5, with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did as they pleased to those who hate him. In Susa, the citadel itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, killed all of Haman's sons. And then, the Queen Esther it reports back in, and it talks to the king, and Esther says, if it please the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow also to do according to this day's edict, and let the 10 sons of Haman be impaled on that stake. May it be a public display, because that's what happened to Haman. Remember, he created this stake to impale Mordecai on, and it turns out he then was impaled on it. The sons of Haman are dead now, and they're still to be impaled as a display. Wow. So the king says, yeah, let's go for it. And so they gathered and they killed all these men, but they laid no hands on the plunder. That's an interesting thing that keeps coming up here. And then we look at the rest of the provinces, and we see 75,000 were killed, but they laid no hands on plunder. So they killed 75,000 of the ones who hated them, but they didn't plunder them. So here's this really interesting thing here. And then on the 14th day, they rested and made that day a day of feasting and gladness. So that was the origin of this story. So the Jews who live in the rural towns had a day of feasting, and they send gifts to one another and food to one another. And so they set it all up, and that's the plan. The Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month that had been turned from them from sorrow into gladness and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. And so later in verse 26, we see that these days were called Purim after the term Pur, and that's the lots that were cast. And they said, this is going to be a constant celebration forever and ever and ever. We are going to celebrate this throughout all generations. And letters were sent out and said, this is the holiday. So that's the origin story of it. And in the midst of this, we see, again, Haman the Agagite. Agag was a king of the Amalekites. Amalekite or Amalek actually means I am king. And if we look back and remember the story when the Jews were coming out of Egypt, they were just becoming the people in full force. They were becoming the firstborn son. They were being born out of Egypt. Amalek was there and attacked the children of Israel as they were coming out. Now we see that in Exodus 17, verse 8. And we see another account where they just came and just pestered and would start killing off the people, attacking the stragglers of this entourage as they head toward the promised land. And so Yahweh gives a curse to them and says, we're going to wipe out Amalekites. We're going to wipe out the name Amalek from before the earth. And then we see King Saul. And King Saul was the first king of Israel, and he had to do battle against Amalek and King Agag, right? That's where we're getting this name, King Agag. And Agag was supposed to be killed. The livestock and everything was supposed to be killed, not plundered. And yet we see King Saul spares Agag's life, and he plunders his goods. And when he's confronted, this becomes a major point of conflict and the downfall of his kingship, because he has not followed God's plan. This is not what we're doing with Amalek. Amalek has a special curse. And so to be an Amalekite today, to be an Agagite, even in modern Israel, is to be the enemy, is to be the sworn enemy, the one who's opposed to God's purposes. And now we have Haman in Esther. Haman the Agagite is the focus of this next plot to exterminate the Jews. He's now the enemy of God's people, number one. And this time he's killed. But to do it correctly, we see this plunder, no plundering move. And we see it all throughout this passage that people were not plundered this time. They did it right. That is good for us to remember, and yet sometimes that's difficult for us because we like to think of a peace-loving God. We like to think of peace happening just automatically. People's hearts will just be warmed and they'll stop being the enemies of God. And we're reminded here in this passage and throughout the Old Testament and New Testament that there are real enemies to the people of God and the purposes of God. God is going to have his human family that he's always wanted, right? He had the divine family. We had learned the sons of God singing for joy at creation. But he wanted a human family to represent him on the earth. He has representation in the heavens, and now he wants a human family. And of course, we know from the very beginning that human family was deceived and turned away, enslaved to death by the enemy. So Satan opposed this plan for God to have a human family and to have that family flourish and fill the earth, representing God among all of his creation. And Adam in the beginning was called the son of God, and his family was to be God's family, representing God's purposes on earth. But when humanity chose to rebel and trust in their own wisdom and start nations in their own image, he disbanded them. We see that in Genesis chapter 11. He started over with one couple, Abraham and Sarah, in a covenant partnership. And we see that those who oppose his family will be cursed, and those that support his family will be blessed. We see that in Genesis chapter 12. I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. Because this is God's plan. He will have his human family. This is going to happen. And he's not going to stop. So all families on the earth are then going to be blessed through this family, Abraham and Sarah, are producing. All families on earth will be blessed. I've been really helped by Tremper Longman in understanding how God is this divine warrior that is going to protect his plan, his purposes, to have a people here on earth representing him. And it's difficult, the divine warrior. I mean, some of that's just amazing. Some of it's a little bit scary. But he describes 5 stages, I just want to work through with you, of the divine warrior motif throughout the Bible. At the first stage, we see God as the divine warrior fighting the enemies of this family that's soon to be called Israel, after Abraham and Sarah's great-grandson, Jacob, or Israel. So we see him fighting the enemies first. And this family increased and became a kingdom, but they seemed to be looking after other gods for their protection and identity. They didn't look to Yahweh himself. And so we see the kingship turn. And then we see a second stage where God's not fighting the enemies of his people. He's actually fighting against his people. He sends them into exile like we experienced with Mordecai and Esther. But his goal remains the same. I'm going to bless all nations through this one people group. And so he always preserves a remnant. You know, and the preservation in this book, Esther, is kind of interesting, right? Because we have this unseen God perspective. And the preservation in Esther's case seems like it was a coincidence. Like, how did that happen? Well, Jon Levenson says this: a coincidence is a miracle in which God prefers to remain anonymous. Right? A coincidence is a miracle in which God prefers to remain anonymous. He's working. He's at work. Do you believe that now? He's at work. He's moving and he's working in your heart right now. He's asking you to trust him. Do you trust me? You know, we look for God in our lives, this unseen God, like we look for the wind. You know, like, where is the wind? I don't see it. All we see are the leaves blowing around and crackling and skidding across my driveway right now. That's all we see. But where are you, wind? I can't see you. And God's like, I'm right here. And I hope you can experience that even today. God's right here. And he cares about you. He loves you. Karen Job says this. If, as the book of Esther implies, God interacts with individuals in such a way as to move history to the goal ordained by his external purposes, surely even the ordinary takes on a miraculous luster. In some ineffable way, ordinary human decisions cooperate with the divine plan. Boy, how much more so could we choose to do that? Could we say, God, I want you right now to make me aware of your purposes so that I can participate willingly. If you're already using the way I talk and the people I'm interacting with, well, then I want to be more intentional about that. Help me walk in the way of Jesus. So that's an important thing. All these coincidences are going to happen. But do you want to be with God in this, or do you want to just be constantly surprised, right? Let's ask God to move with us, and let's be those who walk in step with this miraculous God who's infusing everyday activities, everyday coincidences with his power. So the first stage, again, was God fighting the enemies of the family, right? And then we see in the second stage, God's actually fighting against his family because their loyalty broke down. They didn't pursue him. They weren't allegiant to God. They looked elsewhere. But in the third stage, we hear promises that this divine warrior is going to come. The divine warrior is going to actually come and set up his kingdom on earth, destroying the enemies and defending his people. Wow. God's going to come and set up a kingdom. The king is coming. And they would have in Isaiah and other places this idea of a herald coming and saying, I pronounce to you good tidings. There's good news coming that the kingdom is happening. God is going to come. We see this remnant preserved in order to bring about a new humanity. Like really, an actual new humanity. A new covenant partnership. God comes and says, I'm going to take on flesh and be the human partner, be the covenant partner that I need to accomplish my plans, because the humans keep failing. And so then he comes to do battle with the enemy. And it's in this waiting, this expectation that Jesus is born. It's the unseen God taking on flesh so that we can see the image of the invisible God. And that's where Jesus comes in. That's what we're celebrating this Christmas, because it's in the darkness that the light of the world comes. Not just in the waiting, though, and not just in the darkness, but in the grieving. And I think we've often forgotten the violence that surrounds the story of Christmas. The enemies of God were still after the people of God. And at the point of Jesus' birth, we know that King Herod, the local king on the scene, had heard that there was a king to be born in Israel. And so he researched this prophecy. And then when the wise men came, he deceived them and then went out and murdered all the baby boys in the region in an attempt to eliminate the Christ child. That's the backdrop of this beautiful Christmas story. It's violence against God's plans to have his human family, and it's God's reversal of all that through this humble, meek baby born in a manger that he comes through. We see the dark forces trying to stamp out our hope, to eliminate the remnant, to exterminate the seed of Israel. But the Father, we know, preserved the Son to die another day on Good Friday, because that would accomplish his purposes. Because that's the fourth stage. The fourth stage, we see that Jesus is the divine warrior battling supernatural enemies. He's coming after it. He's intensifying the battle and focusing the target as himself. He picks a fight with the enemies and says, come at me. And we find out that you don't kill these powers. You die to defeat them. Remember, the shackles are death. The shackles are the death that we are owed because we have been deceived to distrust God and trust ourselves, to make ourselves in our own image and to make God in our own image. And you don't kill these powers. You die to defeat them. And Jesus in doing this puts an end to the concept of holy war against physical enemies. That stage is done now. So we are now his family, and we get to tread on this enemy, put the boot on the neck of the serpent, to tread on the enemy. And we do this as we participate in advancing the kingdom, beating down the gates of hell, bringing Jesus to the people, and bringing those people deeper into the family of God, which is what we're all about at our church. So that's what Jesus was doing in this divine warrior mode. And then the fifth and last stage we get in the Bible is God as divine warrior when the kingdom fully comes and Jesus defeats his human and divine enemies, those who would stand in opposition to God and his plan. We know this in the book of Revelation, right? We see that all through the very end of that. We see that's how it's going down. But there's another picture of it in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 24 through 28. You read the whole context, but it says, then comes the end. So we're looking at the end. What's going to happen at the end? When Jesus delivers the kingdom to God the Father after destroying every rule and every authority and power, and the last enemy to be destroyed is death. All things will be subjected to him, and God will be all in all. And that's the final word. In fact, the final word of Esther, if you read with me, the final word at the very end of the book, Mordecai says he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people. Mordecai speaks shalom. And we look at Zechariah about this messianic kingdom, this king who's going to come and who's going to speak shalom, proclaim peace to the nations from sea to sea. Zechariah 9 and 10. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Behold, he's righteous and having salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be cut off, and he shall speak peace to the nations. His rule will be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. Mordecai in this proclamation gave a peace, but that was a temporary peace. And that problem is only going to be solved with the coming of the Messiah, the deliverer, who would rule with peace and justice. You know this passage, Isaiah 9, verse 6. For to us a child is born. You can say it with me. To us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Child of God, beloved family member, may you be stunned by the coincidences this Christmas season. These coincidences that remind you that God is for you and that he's firmly on the throne. He is the divine warrior who fights for you. Come as a humble child in a manger. But the government will be upon his shoulders, and he shall be called the Prince of Peace. May you find peace this Christmas. As we think about communion today, communion, intimacy, connection, which is not possible when we are bound in sin. We can't do it. God is a holy God, and he means to set us apart. He means to break down any division between us and him. That's what the Prince of Peace does. That's how he works. And the goal is communion, togetherness. I forget that all the time, church. I mean, sometimes I'm thinking about, okay, now the goal of my life is to just become a more perfected person or more holiness driven, like on display for the world to see, blah, 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 blah. And God's like, no. The reason I washed you of your sins is so that I could become one with you, so that my life could be your life, so that you could be lost in me, found in me. And that's what we find. We find that in Ephesians chapter 2, that Jesus is the one who has been brought us near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace. Christ himself is the peace of God for you. And so as we take the bread today, we're reminded that we have the peace of God because we have Jesus himself. His blood cleanses us. His body fuels us. So take, eat in remembrance of Jesus. This is his body. In Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. This is a new covenant in his blood, so that we could become the people of God, one with God. I hope you'll join us next week as well. We are starting into our series on Let Heaven and Nature Sing. Just the Christmas theme of how God is bringing light and life into our dark world. And he wants to do that even now in your story, to make a reversal in your story. So invite a friend, tell them to come check it out, share this message today, and share the website, share our YouTube page, go to Facebook and share that out. It's the time to get the message out that we are not lost and alone in our sins. We are not to be distant from God. We are meant to be brought into the oneness with him. So may God richly bless you until we meet again.